This is a job that I've enjoyed for the past 9 years. Prior to that, I did similar religious life support at Stanford University. I'm also a humanist chaplain by training, and so that's all the important things you need to know about me as a professional as I come here today. And before I go any further, I want to remind you that we have index cards and pencils at the back. And so as you are listening in today, I invite you to ask some questions, pass them forward. I think maybe that's what this other basket's for. I also accept tips. And so that way, once I get through my first initial questions for our panelists, we can go over to the audience and get some of your thoughts as well. So, like I said, it's a privilege to gather in a moment when questions of identity, belonging, and coexistence feel especially urgent. Religious pluralism has long been held up as an aspirational ideal in the American story. A vision of diverse communities, not only coexisting, but engaging one another with curiosity, respect, and a shared commitment to the common good. America has always been religiously diverse and deeply divided. Reimagining America requires moving beyond the common reduction of pluralism to that surface-level tolerance or to a kind of polite distance that avoids the deeper work of encountering each other, or accountability, or transformation through relation. So in other cases, engaged pluralism has struggled to address power, inequity, or the realities of those whose identities sit at the margins of traditional religious categories. So today, our task is not simply to defend pluralism as an ideal, but to ask what it might mean to reimagine it for the present moment and for our future. Our panelists today bring a range of perspectives and lived experiences to these questions, and I invite you to listen not only for answers, but for the tensions, for the possibilities, and new directions that emerge through this conversation. And so with that, I'm delighted to now introduce our panelists. I gave them a few questions to open up our discussion, which dealt with whether pluralism, what is really needed for real pluralism beyond tolerance, what are the limits of pluralism, who gets to decide what those limits are, and if they were up for it, even talking about healthy democracy, how it can survive without a strong commitment to pluralism. And so these are just our opener questions. And so I've asked Dr. Lynch to go first, and then I will introduce Dr. Moss. And from there, we will flow into a conversation. So first up, we have Dr. Cecilia Lynch. She is Professor of Political Science at UC Irvine. Professor Lynch is also an honorary professor in the School of Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and co-facilitator of the critical investigations into humanitarianism in Africa collective. Her research, writing, and teaching focus on interrelated themes of religion and secularisms, humanitarianisms, ethics, methodology, and international relations broadly conceived, including its racial and gendered character, employing a critical interpretivist approach to all. Recently, she was recognized as a distinguished scholar of religion and international relations by the International Studies Association for her path-breaking contributions to the field. And perhaps most significantly in today's discussion, Cecilia is the author of Wrestling with God, Ethical Precarity in Christianity and International Relations. So Cecilia, why don't you get us started?
Well, thank you very much for the lovely introduction. My apologies for the jargon in my biography, but that's what we do. It's what we specialize in, is jargon. I also want to thank Pastor Berg and everyone here, because this is really a wonderful opportunity to engage, as the previous panelists were talking about, and really important questions of the day. I want to talk a little bit about my approach to religion, secularism, and international politics And in so doing, think a little bit about what, for me, religious pluralism requires in addition to tolerance. When I began studying religion and secularism more than 30 years ago, I've been around the block a little bit here, the idea was that pluralism could be contrasted to exclusionary religious thinking and or inclusionary religious thinking. So a theologian at Harvard, for example, Diana Eck, had this tripartite distinction between exclusive religion, inclusive, and plurals. And so exclusive was the idea that, my religion's the only game in town, and, you come with me or forget it, and if you don't come with me, any kind of coercive measures to sort of make everybody homogeneous were okay. Inclusionary is, well, mine's superior, but I understand that you probably think yours is too. Then there's that slide into pluralism that, it's really hard, some scholars would say, to get rid of that belief in one's own superiority, one's religious superiority or secular superiority, atheist superiority, if you will. But nonetheless, pluralism was still more of a recognition and tolerance of others. So if you're going on a continuum. But and increasingly others said, well, there's also religious hybridity, right? And that was something that always interested me. And the idea of syncretism or hybridity, the idea that there's no pure religious or secular, if you will, stance, in a sense, that we're all blends of different things. And when I talk to students about this, one of the things that I like to show are slides that show, say, Catholicism in Ireland versus Catholicism in Italy. You even have in two West European countries, very different understandings of Catholicism that blend with pre-Christian paths. So in Ireland, for example, I kind of my husband and I went a little too far. My last name is Lynch on the Irish-American thing, and we named our children Bridget and Aidan, and Bridget and Aidan are both Irish saints, but also Celtic gods. And the funny thing about Catholicism is that, that they're very good at taking on the characteristics of any locality. So the goddess Bridget and Saint Bridget in Ireland have a lot of the same characteristics. They're both poetesses. They're both, the goddess Bridget is supposed to be a goddess of abundance. The Boston Globe years ago said that St. Bridget's main miracle was to be able to turn a bathtub of water into beer. I don't really know about that, but the idea of abundance, right? And fertility and poetry and all of that. So the way these things sort of come out is very interesting to me. And I've contrasted that with, say, forms of Italian Catholicism in the town of Gubbio. I don't know if anybody's been there. It's a gorgeous town built into a hillside in, I think it's Umbria. And if you go there, you see, in addition to every door that opens into an apartment of, most of them from the Middle Ages, you also see another door that's up about this high. And that door is called the Door of the Dead. And that's for spirits to go in and out. So clearly that is not your usual Catholic thing, right? So we're all kind of mélanges, and I think most of my academic writing has taken that into account in one way or the other. And in thinking about religious pluralism and syncretism, I become more and more interested in also indigenous spiritualities of various kinds. And the fact that, for example, different parts of the world were either Christianized or Islamicized or whatever at different points in history, and therefore that also is part of the difference between, say, African Christianities and European Christianities and their mélanges with secularism, if you will. So all of these things I find fascinating. But in this book, one of the things that I struggled with was the core of Christian thinking across a lot of my discipline, international relations. And the fact that even though my discipline says that it's secular, right, that over time, from the early modern period to the present, we've had a lot of shaping of the field by certain Christian ideas. And so when you look at different periods of Christianity, and here I look at the early modern period of colonization, I look at the interwar between World War I and World War II period in Europe, I look at liberation theology, and I look at humanitarianism today. In every one of these periods, we have folks propounding forms of relations among nations, but also religious relations that they thought were the right thing. And even those who thought they were more tolerant of others tended to come across in very superior ways. And, I'm not going to go into all of that right now. We can go into more of it later. So, we always get it wrong, in other words, whether we're religious, whether we're secular, Christian, unchristian. So it seemed to me, anyway. Throw that out there to be a little provocative. But what I come up with on this, then, is the necessity for all of us to be what I call, to recognize our ethical precarity. That is to say that ethically, over time, we and our forebears have not gotten it right. We have promoted violence. We have promoted forms of exclusion and intolerance, right? Even when we thought we were the more tolerant of others, right? So we have to come out of this with an understanding that our ethics are always somewhat incomplete, that we're always working with the socio-political and economic context of our times, and that we need to be more humble, in other words, in understanding that we probably won't get it right either. We still need to act. That doesn't mean that we don't act, right? But we need to be reflexive and always looking at what are the implications of how we act. And so for me, a healthy dose of ethical precarity is where we need to go in addition to just the idea of tolerance. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Dr. Jessica Moss. She is an applied sociologist who teaches at Cal State University Fullerton, in addition to serving as their interfaith faculty fellow. Jessica is also the executive director of the Interfaith Youth Alliance, and she works closely with the Orange County Interfaith Network. Currently, she's leading a certificate in interfaith leadership at CSU Long Beach, and Jessica has worked for a while now with me at USC, serving as the interfaith director at the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. So as you can tell, she is well networked in the interfaith world here in Southern California and more. And if that wasn't enough, she leads interfaith retreats for youth, not only here in LA, but she also takes them to New Mexico, and I heard you might be taking some youth to Minnesota next. And so she really has a passion for this thing called interfaith. And so, Jessica, please give us your perspective on today's subject matter. Thank you. I hear that, and I'm like, when do I sleep? I don't. Anyways, so thinking of this idea of pluralism, like I too was raised in the interfaith world with Diana Eck and Ibu Patel and these ideas of pluralism and kind of the commodification of pluralism in some ways. And so I've always tried, I shouldn't say always, but I fairly quickly tried to push against pluralism as it is promoted as kind of like this society-saving endeavor, and figure out but how do people actually live? Like, what is the actual implications of trying to live in this diverse society, this globalized society? And as I was thinking about these questions, I was reminded of a quote that I learned
in my freshman year of college from Abigail Adams about intelligence, and intelligence being the ability for someone to hold multiple ideas at the same time. And for me, like pluralism, whether we're commodifying it or not, the ideas behind pluralism are really like to live an intentional and intelligent life, like recognizing that we don't have all the answers. I appreciate your call to humility. And so this idea that we need to find ways to recognize where we're coming from, recognize where other people are coming from, and figure out how we're going to live together. On a personal level, while yes, I teach at Cal State Fullerton in the Interfaith Faculty Fellow there, Executive Director of Interfaith Youth Alliance, in most of these spaces, I don't put my own religious identity on the table in most of the time. But I am going to do it here because one of the things I'm advocating for in this panel is that authenticity is like the most important requirement to actually do this work well. So I am a card-carrying member, literally, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormon, as well as a proud pacifist, as well as an advocate for human rights, an advocate to abolish ICE. And so I put all of those identities on the table because I think when we're talking about pluralism, we often think, well, I have my box that I am in or that I claim or that other people have put me in, and you have your box, and we need to figure out how our boxes can like fit next to each other like a little Tetris thing. But to Cecilia's point, like we are all like mixtures of all of these things. And while I have lots to say, and we can talk about this later too, about the institution of the Mormon Church, that is where I was raised. Like I can't like cut that out of my life. And I can't discount the values that I've gained in that space. And so I think part of pluralism is like owning all of these parts of our identities, bringing them to the table, and then allowing other people to own the parts of their identities and to also be conflicted about the parts of their identities, right? To say, do I contradict myself? Yes, I do, right? So for me, that's where I'm coming to this place with is pluralism, not just in the way that we engage with other people, but pluralism that we live in our individual lives.
Beautiful start. I really appreciate the call to humility, to reflexivity, but also your definition of intelligence, Jessica, about the capability of holding multiple, probably competing ideas at the same time. As you heard in my introduction, I'm a secular humanist and an atheist, and I happen to also be a chaplain, which means I do provide spiritual care. Sometimes that's too much for a person to sort of process in a first meeting. And I get this a lot because I'm on the campus of USC. Most often people assume I am Christian. And truthfully, they're not wrong. I'm a Filipina. I was raised in Guam. My family's in the Philippines. And if you know anything about the Philippines, is we're predominantly Catholic. And so that is the culture in which I was raised and which has formed me. And for that reason, I still benefit from Christian privilege, right? Because it has allowed me to navigate a world that has been dominated by Christian norms. And even in my position to this day, people assume I'm a Christian because I'm a dean of religious life. And sometimes it's a lot of fun just bursting that bubble. But on the flip side of that, I also want to say, as someone who was an atheist from a very young age, when I came to the Bay Area and to Southern California, there was a bit of sort of gatekeeping in terms of what an atheist could be, right? And so you might have guessed I also was raised with indigenous traditions and folk religions in the Philippines, and those continue to inform how I relate to this world and other people. And so it also meant that I had to sometimes co-create the humanist organizations or communities that I wanted to be a part of, because there were some secular communities that really did not want to receive me as my whole self, right? And I think that sort of message is in service to what we're talking about today, because we're using the word religious pluralism, but we're also talking about worldview pluralism, right? The broader, like, how do we come together even across this perceived divide between the religious, the spiritual, and the secular? And so I wanted to offer up just a bit of my own positionality to help complicate the subject matter. But also going back to the piece about Diana Eck, exclusionary, inclusive, and pluralism. In my own research, I've talked a lot about the sort of intersectionality that comes with our spiritual identities, and recognizing that even if you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, or so forth, there are so many ways to live into that label. And so, in many ways, these labels don't serve us. And that's probably why I got so addicted to interfaith work, because it meant that I could go deeper with people and better understand how those terms made sense for them, right? So before we move on to the next question, I did want to offer just one more definition of religious pluralism, since we're all kind of talking about it in different ways. And my definition comes from Jenny Smalls. She wrote a book called Critical Religious Pluralism Theory, and she's a higher education researcher. And so her take on religious pluralism is this. She says it is an active, dialogic engagement with difference. And in this case, religious, secular, and spiritual differences, purposefully designed in order to create a more just, more moral, and inclusive society. And so that tends to be the way in which I approach this idea of pluralism on my campus. So why don't we pivot now? Joshua was nice enough to propose about 30 questions for us, but I've narrowed it down to about 5. But like I said, I'm ready for your tips and any questions you may have as well. So this first question I'm going to pose is under the umbrella of democracy and public life. And I want to ask you both, how can people bring their deepest moral and religious convictions into public life without seeking to impose them on others?
Is it because I'm Mormon? It's okay. It's okay if it is. Okay, so there's 2 things in this question that one is I fully wrote down, like Mormonism, because I also introduced myself. Like I said, most spaces I don't put that out there front and center. I typically say I'm an interfaith activist and an academic. And when push comes to shove, I'll say I'm a nuanced Mormon. The Mormons hate that. If you know any Mormons, they're like, no, you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm like, I'm Mormon. I'm culture. So, yeah, like, the tradition that I come from has a real hard time with engaging in public life without, I would say, an ulterior motive. And that's something that I'm constantly pushing against and working through. This question also makes me think about the First Amendment and freedom of religion, which we talk about a lot, and religious freedom is like a big term that people like to use, again, with ulterior motives. But I also like to point out it's freedom of and freedom from religion. So this idea that I can have a religious, spiritual, ethical, moral conviction, and you can have that as well. And we can work together. So this idea that that we have to live out our religion in a very specific way. Again, that pluralism comes into play because for me, in my tradition, like when I go to church on Sunday, I am the outlier. And there are a lot of people that have felt like outliers and they choose to leave. They choose to go somewhere else or they whatever their decisions are because of the lack of pluralistic ethics in certain spaces. For me, I see it as someone birthed me into this space and you're not gonna make me uncomfortable. I'll make you uncomfortable. That's how I engage in public life when it comes to my church. When it comes to other spaces, just like knowing when and where and how to engage in certain conversations. I think that's the other thing. Like, I try to make it very clear. If someone asks me a question about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I respond. However, I authentically am showing up at that day, at that moment, recognizing that I also served a mission for the church. And I have feelings about that because I'm a complicated human. But being able to choose, like for example, I made a choice to wear this shirt today. I was pretty darn confident that everyone in this room, everyone that I would engage with today would be like, I like your shirt. When I made the intentional choice to wear this shirt to church the week after Renee Good was murdered, I didn't know how that was going to go, but it was a public space, a tradition that claims we value agency, and the response was, you can't wear that shirt. And I said, God's okay with it. And I walked out. So this idea, I'm getting a roundabout way. I'm not from the Midwest like Robin, but I obviously have a roundabout way of responding to questions. I guess what I'm trying to get at is every space that we're in, we are our full selves. And in order for us to really value religious freedom or freedom of religion, freedom from religion, we have to be willing to be our own selves. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable sometimes. And we have to allow that from other people. We have to allow other people to be their full selves. And we have to gain the skills of, I like what you said, like the reflexivity of being like, this situation is making me uncomfortable. How am I going to deal with that? Instead of pushing on the other person to make that other person feel like they have to take care of me. I get to take care of how I feel. I openly want the conversations to happen. So when I was told by my bishop, you can't wear that shirt, I said, who said I can't wear this shirt? And he said, oh, there's some people in the congregation that are uncomfortable with your shirt. And I said, please invite them to come have a conversation with me. That has not happened. But I continue to wear the shirt, and I continue to wear other shirts that promote other social justice issues. They've not talked to me again because I think they figured out that they're not getting anywhere. But when we're in public space, we need to be fully ourselves. That's the crux of my argument.
Yeah, thanks. And I also appreciate how you flagged there are different kinds of public spaces. Right? So within your church, within the broader communities, for example, obviously within government, within the world. And for me, I grew up Catholic. I say that I hang out with Episcopalians because I say I haven't joined because why would I exchange one set of neuroses for another? But at this point, but for some time, I've considered Catholic neurosis to be a lot stronger. At any rate, that's why I hang out with Episcopalians. But I consider myself more interfaith, if you will. That said, I think that one thing is our deeply held convictions can change over time with our interactions. I did grow up in the Midwest. Speaking of Mormons, I grew up in Independence, Missouri, where the reorganized, now they call themselves something different, stayed. So that's where Joseph Smith stayed, right? Brigham Young went on, or something like that, to be too simplistic about it. At any rate, we would have slumber parties and we would talk about religion. I mean, I don't think you would probably do that in California when you're a preteen, but I could be wrong. My first career goal was to be a virgin martyr because I was looking up confirmation names and they were all martyrs, young martyrs. There were strong women, right? But they were all martyrs. I didn't know what the virginity thing was about at the age of 6, but I was really damn scared about the martyrdom thing, and I thought, well, my strong enough, to. One of my sister's names is Joan, and flames all around you, and Cecilia, she was a martyr as well. And, they're all, so many of them are martyrs. Anyway, so I got over that. Thank God. And but nonetheless, to this day, I have a lot of respect for certain traditions of Catholicism and a lot of questions about, how is it that folks who, a lot of my work in Africa, some of my closest friends are a couple of Jesuit priests, one from Congo, one from Kenya, and, how is it that given all the damage that Catholicism, Christianity, other religions have done around the world, in colonization and everything, how can people kind of justify in the more recent sense, right? And then how can I respect that? So I think that, again, it's this kind of deep reflexivity about we don't know it all. We do have to think about context, we have to think about histories, and also what speaks to others. And I will just end this by saying academia is in the US, is a deeply secular space. And when I see my very impressive activist, feminist, gender scholar from Ghana, friend, who is also very Christian, when she signs her academic, whatever her line underneath, with a Bible verse, that's something I would never, ever, ever do. Nor would I ever be able to do that, probably in the US. Maybe if I taught it, Notre Dame, or at, what's the place, Iola, something like that. So, but otherwise, no. And also, though, there are things that would make me feel uncomfortable. So I thought a lot about those spaces, right? And I think that it is important to be able to say, okay, I'm comfortable, and it's not simply a matter of private-public, because there are public spaces where I do want to bring this discussion of religion in, because keeping it out is also quite harmful, right? On the other hand, do I have to sort of flash mine around, especially if I know that I still have so much to learn, right? And so I think it's those kinds of things, and I would go back to the ethical precarity and that awareness that helps, I think, in our understanding of how to navigate spaces.
Thank you both. This is such an important part, or important point, talking about these different areas of public life. As you heard, I was raised Catholic, but I've been an atheist for a very long period. But as an atheist, when I was working at Stanford, I did not feel comfortable working in the church and being openly secular, just given my workplace, right? As well as what is considered legitimate religion. Many of our higher ed institutions want you to be boxed into like an Abrahamic faith, and then everything else is considered exotic, right? But then I think about my committee chair when I did my dissertation at USC, and he was really a gift I did not anticipate. He happened to be evangelical Christian. And a lot of my dissertation was talking about the Christian norms that are built into higher education, just given our societal history. But then he and I got to talking about secularism and how he too cannot bring his full self into the classroom. And it's the same issue of imposing one's belief on others. He didn't feel comfortable coming out as a Christian in a classroom space because people would expect that then he might want to evangelize or proselytize and so forth. But being Christian was very central to his being, right? And so he felt a bit oppressed by the secularism on our campus. And so, me being an atheist, having felt oppressed by the Christian dominance in many of the universities I worked in, I was amazed at how we shared in that feeling in our workplaces, right? And so I'm delighted that I was openly secular and USC hired me anyways, right? Because I had all the skill sets to serve as an associate dean. And the truth is, I didn't get much hate mail when the memo went out that, an atheist was going to be a dean of religious life. But the hate mail I did receive was from atheists, actually, for being secular in religious spaces, right, or even associating. And truthfully, that's an extreme of the atheist world. Many more secular folks are actually totally happy that I'm utilizing the resources of my private university to make welcoming community, right, for our secular students. Anyhow, I think this kind of leads us into my other question under public life, and Jessica, you kind of touched on it a bit, but talking about what is the difference between religious freedom and religious privilege, and why does that distinction matter?
So I do international politics, and so for me this question is really interesting on more the transnational global level as well. It's also interesting on a national level. My husband works for Land Legal LGBTQ rights organization. And so, the baker in Colorado who refused to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, or now he's working a lot on the impossibility of getting health care for transgender people, the increasing difficulty. And some parents who've moved from one state to another, and now that state is cutting off transgender health care. And what your story about your community here is really moving and difficult as well. So I think that rather than sort of articulating a particular principle at this point, although I think we could do that, but it is always interesting to me how folks claim religious freedom, or in the case of France, for example, they claim secularism, laïcité, but they've circumscribed who can actually have, small amounts of freedom in that. So in France, I could wear a small cross, right, in a public space or school or something, but I could not wear a hijab, right? So, and for a while there were the burkini on the beaches and the Côte d'Azur, so you could go without any clothes at all, but you could not wear burkini or a burqa swimsuit, right? So how France has equated laïcité, or a certain kind of secularism, with minimal expressions of Christianity is astonishing, and primarily targeted against Islam, right? And we know that 125 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago, it was against Judaism with the Dreyfus Affair, things like that. But now it's, so this ultra secularist country in so many ways is only secularist in particular ways, right? So that, I think, is very difficult. And then if you go to India, for example, with the Hindu nationalists, you also have folks who have promoted this idea that, this is a Hindu nation, right? So it's this idea of what is an identity and how does that exclude others, right? And what is my privilege? And it goes back to the question of public spaces. So if you're a baker and you're selling to the public, right? It's one thing if you're just doing it on your own for your own church, your church that excludes LGBTQ plus folks. But if you're selling to the public, then the public includes everyone, right? Presumably. So we are, I think, in a situation, obviously, in this country now, where certain Christians feel that they have that they've been persecuted, and they're really pushing that narrative for religious freedom. But what about the Episcopalians who say, my religion says that everybody has to serve everybody regardless of their sexuality, and so and my religious freedom, or I am an Episcopal gay person and I'm marrying another gay person, and our religious freedom says that we can do that and we have the right to go wherever we want, right? So these kinds of things I'm more pointing them out than resolving them at this time. But I think at some point that is a key question to keep in front of the discussion. When does one's religious freedom, when is it really privilege that one wants to keep up?
Yeah, yes, to all of that. Because this idea that religious freedom is used as a way to invisibilize the Christian privilege. It's used to say, no, everyone has access, but you only have access if you fit our social structure. And we're going to not talk about the fact that our social structure is based in Christian privilege. So there's that part. The two things that popped into my mind when you asked this question just now was, so in my role as the Interfaith Faculty Fellow at Cal State Fullerton, we did a panel about religion in the workplace. I've also done that at USC. But this last semester, one of the panelists made a comment about, so she herself is hijabi Muslim, and she made the comment about in her workplace how she had to have a conversation with her superior, suggesting that, hey, could we maybe not have a Christmas party, but could we potentially just have a winter celebration or something? And to her superior's credit, manager's credit, they were we were not aware that this was a thing. And they changed the verbiage, and it was all great. So afterwards, one of the participants at this panel raised her hand, and she was like, I still don't understand why that's a problem. I want to celebrate Christmas. Why is that a problem? And I'm like 8 people just told you why it's a problem. But okay, let's have this conversation again. And this idea that it doesn't impact me, or it doesn't bug me if I see a menorah, or it doesn't bug me if I see this other thing. So why does it bug you if you see this Christian stuff? Not recognizing context and history and all of these other things, right? Which leads me to another example that happened with my kid just 3 weeks ago. My oldest just graduated from 5th grade. I guess that's a thing now. So 2 of his best friends are Palestinian and Muslim. And their moms and I work together when we can. We're all working moms outside of the home, but when we can, we help with the PTA. So our job, one of the things that we were going to do is help set up the night before promotion to make the balloon arch and all the stuff. Again, I didn't know this was a thing. So on promotion morning, I get there at 7 a.m. I'm helping put all these things together. There are very few moms there because who wants to wake up that early, and we have kids to get ready and all of these things. And so the celebration starts, and one of my sons, one of the moms, comes up to me and says, I'm so sorry I couldn't be here this morning. I'm like, it's totally fine. Oh, by the way, Eid Mubarak. And she's like, yeah, we had to like get all this stuff done early so that we could go to the mosque so that we can be back here in time to do this promotion thing, and then we're gonna go back. And I was like, I have given the principal an interfaith calendar every year for the last 6 years. How are we making promotion on the same day as one of the holiest days in Islam? Like, why? Like, no one would think, like, let's have our promotion on Christmas Eve. Like, no one would think that. But this idea of Christian privilege, and again, going back to religious freedom and the First Amendment that says we have freedom of religion, but we also have freedom like from religion. Like we have the opportunity and the responsibility to make sure that everyone is being seen. And honestly, like, do it the next day. Like, it's fine. The kids still have to go back to school the next day. It was very strange to me. But anyways, so this idea that Christianity has become invisibilized in a lot of ways when we say religious freedom, and therefore, when Christianity is being pushed against, it feels like they're being attacked, as opposed to saying, no, we're just trying to create equity for all of the other religious and secular communities that exist in our society. So,
Thank you both. I think I'll also add an example from higher education in regards to your interfaith calendar, which she gives me every year as well. If you're a friend of Jessica, you might get one as well.
can we sign up?
Yes, yes. So in terms of religious freedom, USC is a private institution, and so we do our best to make sure that everyone understands they are free to practice their tradition on campus. But as a student-led religious or spiritual group, you also have to welcome everyone into your group, whether they share in your beliefs or not. And whether they share your theological perspective or non-belief perspective. And so that's a good, I think, we do on our campus. But there's also religious privilege on my campus. As you already heard, we have not hosted a Christmas celebration. But if you think about our academic calendars, it's pretty obvious when it's winter break, it's around Christmas, and then Hanukkah around there as well. But then what about if you're Jewish? What about those high holy days? You're just gonna be in class and midterms the whole time and not go and spend your highest holy days with your family? No, you want to go, but guess what? You have to ask for that privilege, right? At my university to this day, you have to submit a piece of paper to your faculty member, and your faculty member has to agree that it's okay for you to either move that midterm or skip that class or put the assignment in later or earlier. And just think about this for a moment. In a society that is so about like keeping your religion personal, do you know how difficult it is for students to submit a form to a faculty member revealing their religious beliefs out of fear then that they might be persecuted because of those beliefs? And actually, I have many examples of students who have been persecuted because of their beliefs. And sadly, I also know students who have not observed their religious traditions out of. So that is a privilege that exists on university campuses to this day, and I do my best to make sure that all students know that they can get an accommodation. But I also wonder, like, do we get rid of this idea of accommodations and have something else such that people can just really be their full selves and do their celebrations when they do their celebrations without having to opt out or be persecuted. So anyhow, that is just one example from the USC campus. I'm going to move us right along, and I think our next question is more towards the idea of building relationships across these differences. And so I'm going to ask our panelists, what experiences have you had that have most changed the way you think about people whose beliefs differ dramatically from your own? Well, I'll start by saying the reason I do interfaith is because
I had a lot of very contentious conversations with some evangelical Christians. So I don't know if that was a positive or a negative, but did lead me to what I do today. So there's that. Also, just with like other members of my family. So I will say this: for all of the critiques that I have of my religious community, one of the things that I have more recently come to appreciate is that if anybody knows anything about Mormons, we do this geographical thing. So when you live somewhere, similar to Catholicism and with a parish and diocese and whatnot, but like there's still some flexibility in like moving around. If you don't like the priest or you don't like the people that live there, right? Like you can go to a congregation like the next town over or whatever. But in Mormonism, it's very like you don't get to be a card-carrying member of the church if you can't prove that you are serving in that geographical area that you live in. And so what that means is you either put up with the bishop that is a racist for 5 years until he gets, because we rotate out, or you leave for 5 years until someone else comes in. You either put up with your kids being taught by people that have zero theological training and then wait for them to come home and then you have to reteach them all of the lessons correctly. You either do that or you just leave. And I have struggled, like I said earlier, with the like just leave because I don't want to give up the thing that is mine. Like it's where I was raised, it's who I am, it's in my body, and I don't want to give up the good stuff because of this other crap. So the thing that I've learned to appreciate is because you're in that geographical area and you are forced to see these people, forced, you have agency, but to see these people every Sunday or multiple times a week, depending on activities and whatnot, you have to listen to the people that are MAGA. You have to listen to the people that are like want to kick out like literally members of their own congregation because of their positions on immigration or whatever. On the flip side, if they want to be card-carrying members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have to look at my shirt when I show up on Sunday. So this is something that I think I've more recently come to appreciate about my tradition and about when I'm talking about people that have vastly different beliefs than me. They are people that I see every Sunday. And I personally don't choose to just go to another congregation where people have the same political, ethical, moral beliefs and frameworks as I do, because there might be one other person in my congregation that sees my shirt and is like, oh, thank goodness, I'm not alone. And for the people that do disagree with me, again, they have the option. They can either come to me and say like, hey, can we have a conversation about your shirt? Or they can ignore me, but they're gonna be uncomfortable. And I think that me showing up every Sunday is my small protest, my small way of trying to say like, hey, we are all God's children. We all deserve to take the sacrament. We all deserve to feel loved. We all deserve to be in this space. And if this is the one space in your Christian privileged, mostly white life that you feel uncomfortable because of my shirt, you get to learn something. And I get to learn things too, because I get to learn that the sweet grandma lady that brings my kids candy and presents like every Sunday and remembers their birthdays also has some pretty horrific ideas about Palestine. And I have to figure out how am I going to smile at her and thank her for loving my children when I also know that she doesn't love all children. And how do I have conversations with her in a way that doesn't, I appreciate what the councilwoman said earlier, like, if you want to fight, you're fighting on your own, right? Like, I'm going to keep showing up and I'm going to keep loving you and I'm going to keep appreciating how much you love my children. And maybe one day something will click in your brain and you'll be like, oh, that's what Jessica was talking about. Right, yeah. Even the kids in Palestine are God's children. That's where I put myself in those positions for. And so I don't know if that answered the question, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I think that these are such difficult times, I think, for that. But I am extremely thankful that I have, in my academic career, been able to do a fair-based problem and interview for different projects. I work on the intersection of humanitarian aid and religion, and so I've been interviewing folks in Muslim NGOs, Christian NGOs, a couple of Jewish NGOs, a lot of secular spaces, and in different parts of the world, Middle East, and across different parts of Africa, especially also in Europe and in the US. And so just, even though I think I'm pretty woke, I'm always having these experiences that show me that I've still got a ways to go. So I remember one, and when I grew up again in the Midwest, I didn't know really anybody who was secular or anybody who was atheist, let me put it that way. I didn't know anybody who's Jewish, and I didn't know anybody who was Muslim, certainly not Muslim. As I went into high school, I started meeting some folks who were Jewish in Kansas City, for example, but it really wasn't until later that we kind of got out of our Christian bubble. We were sort of the odd people out as the Catholics, vis-a-vis all the Protestants. And one of my sisters famously, when I was very young, took a little vial of holy water and a rosary and tried to go baptize all of her friends in the neighborhood. And I keep thinking, if those Baptist parents had known, that is what, our family would totally been ostracized. But, so a couple of experiences that just taught me, step back, just never make assumptions, right? So 2007, height, or 2008, height of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm in Mombasa, eastern coast of Kenya, which is on the Indian Ocean coast, largely Muslim. I had a couple of interviews with Muslim women human rights activists before Friday prayer. So I was rushing from one to the other, and I took this little three-wheel taxi for the first time. I took well, I guess they happened in the Philippines, but at any rate, they kept passing by. It's a shared taxi situation, and they seem to be full. So one taxi driver pulls over, and he had two women in the back wearing full niqab, and I said, it looks like you're full, and he said, oh no, there's room. And I thought, well, they might be uncomfortable with me, but I got in, and then one of the women starts chatting with me right away, and we're talking. She's asking me about kids, and we're going on about various things. And so I take off my sunglasses, and she says, you have nice eyes, why do you cover them? And so she's covered everything except the eyes, right? And so I'm thinking, oh, okay. And I thought immediately of an article that I offered teaching by a sociologist, anthropologist named Laila Abdullah, on why do Muslim women really need saving? Because, of course, that was Laura Bush and many others' justification for war, and that continues to be the justification for war. And I thought, Cecilia, my God, just duh. You can't make these assumptions. So I think that for me, it's that ongoing recognition that I cannot make assumptions about people as soon as you think that those folks are like this. They're not. You meet somebody who's not. So I think for me, it's that really. am having a harder time with folks from my background who have become very MAGA, and that's not all of them by a long shot. But I think that there's a really important intersectionality with class and region, and we can come back to this, but different forms of paternalism, whether they be secular or progressive religious paternalism, can be very, very destructive when it comes to trying to keep open doors. That said, I don't always have the strength or the stomach for it.
Thank you for those answers. The question was, what are these experiences that have most changed us to think about people whose beliefs differ dramatically from our own, and it seems all of us are bringing these lived experiences, even within context with people that we are really close with, right? In my own experience, I thought of two examples. I started doing interfaith when I was in college, and I remember I wasn't sure if I'd be welcomed at interfaith, and so I asked Reverend Terry if an atheist could go to the interfaith dialogue, and she said, Vanessa, not only are you welcome, but we need you. And I'm so glad she did that, because she gave me permission to be my whole self in that space amongst my peers. I hadn't come out as an atheist to my family yet, and so for her to give me space to be an atheist with my college classmates was really special for me. And guess what? I was the only atheist. And yes, there were evangelical Christians who wanted to fix me. But actually, those were some fun conversations I had with them, because I got to question their assumptions about faith and God. And it's like, it gave me permission to have conversations I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so the interfaith dialogue thing has really transformed me as a young adult, and obviously why I continue to work in that space to this day. But something else is, as you heard, I'm a chaplain, and so I went through clinical pastoral education. It's a training that chaplains do most often in hospitals, hospice, or other settings. And part of this work we do in that setting is to kind of take an inventory of like when we're uncomfortable providing care to someone, and then noticing where that discomfort comes from. And guess what? I had biases that perhaps I hadn't considered why I had biases, and biases I was holding against people of a whole religion. And if I'm going to provide care to everyone, I had better keep those feelings in check, right? And so I really appreciated the opportunity to go into this clinical pastoral education space and be like, oh yeah, where did that come from? How did I gain that feeling towards a whole group of people? And how can I challenge myself to grow out of that, right? So those were two experiences that have really transformed me, and I continue to engage with people from different backgrounds to this day. Okay, I think I have one more question, and then I did receive two questions from the audience. So let's move on to the contemporary challenge. Yes, this is a big one. What challenges does Christian nationalism pose to religious pluralism? And how should communities respond while remaining committed to democratic values?
For me, Christian nationalism, there's no sugarcoating it. It poses huge challenges. I do feel that, again, an intersectional perspective is important, looking at class as well. And I've often thought, coming from Missouri, going to graduate school in New York, New Yorkers famously confuse geography of anything west of Philadelphia until you get to California. And my husband's from D.C., Washington, D.C. He went to college in Iowa. His mother consistently sent his mail to Ohio, and it actually got there. And so, I do think, and now, part of my saviors through a lot of these Trump administrations have been late night comedy. But even then, I'm always attuned to where they diss, like, oh, and they're like the people who work at Walmart, or something like that. I mean, I want to just wring their neck, as my mother used to say. So I feel like, and it's not that all Christian nationalists, obviously, it's more complicated than to say there are wealthy pastors who manipulate these folks. It's a lot more complicated. But I do think that we do need to bear in mind that even though these folks usually have tons and tons of white privilege, at the same time, sometimes it's just a matter of listening and then beginning to ask questions about whether they've always felt that way, or what about this interpretation, or how do they feel when somebody does something else. The Episcopal church I go to in Long Beach, it's a sanctuary church now, but earlier in the 2010s, it divided the church to shelter a woman with a baby who would have otherwise been deported. She would have been deported while she was still nursing her baby. The baby would have been allowed to stay. Now they probably would have found a way to deport both of them. So the church sheltered her, and every Sunday, it starts to make even like USA Today, every Sunday we would have protesters from the local community. And one of the signs we'll never forget, Jesus said, "Deport with love." Deport with love. And I think that scripture. I do think that one could, I didn't engage because they were on the other side of the fence and I didn't want to open it up and whatever. But I do think that there are ways when one has the patience, right, and the sort of curiosity and the willingness to listen. I feel like liberal society has built up years of sort of carving up things so that we don't have to listen. And I feel like now we're confronted with all of these inexplicable things. And I too just want to say, hey, it's all racist, it's all horrible, it's all terrible. But off and on, I try to find these ways of thinking about, is there, as a previous panel was saying, what are there ideas about the common good that we can talk about? That said, I think one of the most dangerous things about Christian nationalism and right-wing Christianity is its alliance with trying to erase history. Because if we are not going to understand chattel slavery, and if we are not going to understand indigenous genocide, then we're not going to be able to have a lot of these conversations and how they continue to impact race today, how they continue to impact ideas of nationhood by the Christian nationalists. So if we don't get there, we really have to work to make sure that our education systems are not closed down.
And before you speak, Jessica, I'm realizing this is being recorded and some people also cannot read your shirt. So I wanted to just spell it out. Her shirt says, "Abolish ICE." And she also is wearing a pin that says, "Everything is political."
Oh, thank you. This is also it's like a uniform that I wear every time I take my kids to Discovery Cube. Anyways, so when I read this question, yes, Christian nationalism, I put on my notes, is the capital THE problem when it comes to advocating for a pluralist society or anything, but just nationalisms in general, right? Cecilia already mentioned Hindu nationalism, we can think about Zionism. Anytime we're talking about superiority, and then utilizing religion to justify that superiority, there's going to be a problem. And so, what was the rest of the question? I don't know. That was like the biggest point I wanted to make is that like superiority nationalisms of all kinds are going to create the barrier to having any kind of productive conversation because it like I've gotten the people in my community, people, my religious community, my family, different things like, oh well, Jessica obviously hates America. And I'm like, what? No, I love America. I hate what we're doing in America. So this idea that you're either with us or against us, I appreciate that. I mean, everyone has a role to play in the carving up and the saying who we can and can't have a conversation with, who we can and can't listen to, who does or does not have a valid opinion or idea or life experience. Yeah, I'm just taking the time to listen while maintaining your sanity.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and that's just a reminder that this is going on in so many parts of the world, right? So, again, you have interpretations of laïcité that are undergirded with Christianity that motivate the far right in France. You have, in India, of course, you have the BJP, the whole idea of Hindu nationalism. In the Sahelian countries across the Sahel of Africa, northern Africa, you have a struggle between really strong, for lack of a better term, kind of indigenous forms of Islam with what they call the reformist tendency to say, no, there's only one way that the church is Quran, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's not just here that these things are happening, and I don't know if that's something just to depress everybody or to say, hey, look at Hungary, at least they're moving a little bit, even though they still have someone who's on the right in government. But that these are reasons why we do have to keep some kind of dialogue, but we also have to keep out in the public sphere.
Thank you both, and I think I'll just tack on my answer to the Christian nationalism question in regards to how challenges religious pluralism. And I think we heard something really great this morning from Nick Fish, and he was talking about how we are now hearing this narrative of from our own government that this nation was founded in Christian beliefs. And what Nick was talking about was actually you can find it in these original documents that over and over and over in different ways the commitment to secularism because they were the product of persecution, right? And yet what we're hearing at this top level and from very loud people is that this is a Christian nation, but actually I think we need to speak just as loud as to our commitment to that freedom from religion, freedom of religion, and our belief in that all should be welcome here, right? The equity of it all. So I've received several questions, and of course, because I was going through all of Joshua's, we only have a few more minutes. And so I'm going to take just one of these, but then I want those of you who did submit a question know that you can approach us afterwards and we can answer those on the fly too. But I wanted to pose this one to us as our closing question. It says, should children be exposed to as many religions as possible or no religion at all until they are intellectually mature enough to think and or interpret critically for themselves? And so I'm going to let you think about that because I have an answer. And it's interesting because on our education panel earlier, we heard a strong preference that religion not be allowed in schools. And I'm an atheist, and I'm going to say, actually, the young adults that I want to see on my college campus, I would love if they were religiously literate. I would love if they had been taught about other religions, such that they could have that reflexivity or the humility that their tradition in which they were gifted in their household is not the only tradition. And so that is my answer, and I think there are ways that you can bring religion into schools. I'm not recommending chaplains like so many states are trying to get in there now. I do want children to be cared for, but perhaps not by chaplains. But I do want our children to be educated about the diversity of beliefs in the world. Other thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. My short answer, because I haven't done that, is yes. So I am raising two small children, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. They go to almost all of the interfaith events that I go to. So they have been in mosques for prayers. They have gone to iftars. Their two best friends are Muslim, and they bring them iftar packages during Ramadan. Granted, like mom does that, right? I'm a sociologist. I'm fully aware of the whole socialization and indoctrination and all that good stuff. But my children, this is like a proud mom moment. So I teach my children about the values, not necessarily the culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the things that we started this last year is tithing. Most communities have some form of tithing, zakat, charity giving. And they started gaining enough funds to have something that they could actually donate. But I have feelings about where that money should go, and I don't necessarily think it needs to go. This is being recorded, so here you go, Bishop. Anyways, so I asked my children, I said, like, okay, so the standard in our tradition is we donate 10%. You have 10%. What would you like it to go to? You can send it to the church and let the church decide what happens with it. You can, whatever. My 9-year-old, immediately, I want it all to go to Palestine. For me, this idea is that he is still living his gifted belief, right? His gifted tradition. But because he is aware of his friends, because he is in a home where we don't censor really anything that we say around our children, they hear about reproductive rights, and they hear about Islamophobia, and they hear about all of these things, and they go to different houses of worship. I have no idea what they're going to do when they're 16, 18. Are they going to go on a mission? Are they going to serve in the Peace Corps? I don't know, but hopefully they're going to be compassionate human beings. And so I do think, to Vanessa's point, like there needs to be some way to teach about religion in schools, especially if they're not getting it at home, because parents don't know how to talk about it, or they're afraid to talk about it, or what we hear a lot in Interfaith Youth Alliance is like, oh, are they going to convert to another religion because they participated in interfaith? I have not seen that happen. I have seen students that have been questioning and they're already kind of on their own path. But if anything, it makes them more committed to their values. Maybe not to the institution, which I'm all for breaking down the institutions, but to the values that are being promoted. That is what they're committed to, and that is what I think we need to, again, build that religious literacy to be able to do that.
So I don't know how, without more discussion of and exposure to different religious traditions and different ways of being in those religious traditions, I don't know how we can teach our children how to accept others' full selves or as they develop. My husband grew up in a very, very secular / atheist household, but he went to prep schools that were largely Episcopalian, and he has a small Sephardic Jewish background on his mother's side, which unfortunately they never practiced. But unfortunately for me, so my daughter's 5 years old. My aunt sends her a video around Christmas time of a little drummer boy. She watches it. She always watches like this. I mean, she's now in her 30s. watching and she says, I don't know what I really think about this Jesus thing, because after all, I am part Jewish. My husband used to say, you can tell them you're sending them to church. I'm going to offer them football games on Sundays, and we'll see what happens. Actually, he then decided he was going to be received in the Episcopal Church at some point. And my mother kept saying, oh, Cecilia, you converted him. And I said, you know, we've been married 20 years. I didn't convert him. You know, this was his idea. But I just think that, you know, for my family, for example, any little exposure was really important, but there was almost never enough, really, of different folks and different ways of being. So, you know, again, you have both spoken so eloquently about being your full selves and how you practice interfaith work. I have been involved in a program with high school students, public high school students in Orange County with one of my colleagues. One of my colleagues started on different forms of tolerance, and a couple of my colleagues do sessions on race, one does gender, one does sexuality, I do something on religion. And I do find that religion is really not talked about, and the teachers come as well. So religion is really, or secularism or whatever, it's just not talked about. So if we don't do it, we're not giving our children that literacy, which is super, super important.
All right, Jessica and Cecilia, it's been a delight. Thank you so much, folks. And I think at this time we get a 15-minute break. So go out, have fun, but come back quickly. Okay.